Hi, welcome back to Read to Me. Today I'll be reading chapters 5 and 6 of R.L. Stine's The Fear Street Saga, The Betrayal. Chapter 5. I dislike peeling potatoes, Susanna groaned. Her mother, seated in front of the hearth with the baby on her lap, raised her eyes to Susanna, her features tight with concern. Are you feeling well, daughter? It isn't your nature to complain. I am feeling well, Susanna replied, sighing. I shall never feel well again, she thought miserably. Never, never, never. She wanted to tell her mother everything, tell her about Edward and how he had lied to her, how he had betrayed her. But Susanna knew that she had to keep her broken heart a secret. Her meetings with Edward were against all rules of conduct. Susanna had sinned, and now she was paying for her sins. Paying with an empty feeling that gnawed at her without relief, paying with a heavy sadness she knew she'd never shake. Martha Good rose from her chair, cradling the sleeping baby in one arm, and stepped up behind Susanna at the table. She put her free hand to Susanna's forehead. You feel a little warm, daughter. Do you feel feverish? Susanna lowered her knife and gazed up at her mother. I am not ill, she said impatiently. I just detest peeling potatoes. They're so wet and slippery. Martha Good took a step back, startled by Susanna's vehemence. We should all be thankful that we have been given potatoes for our meal, she said softly. Your father works so hard, Susanna. It is a sin to complain if there is food on the table. Yes, Mother, Susanna relented, lowering her eyes. Edward's face flashed into her mind, his thick brown hair, his dark eyes. Where are you now, Edward? Susanna wondered, picking up another potato to peel. What are you doing? I know you're not thinking about me. Are you thinking about your bride? Are you packing your bags, preparing for your journey to Portsmouth? She uttered a long sigh and stabbed the knife blade into the potato. Susanna, are you sure you're not ill? Her mother demanded. No, not ill, Susanna muttered, unable to shake Edward from her mind. The potatoes can wait, her mother said, returning to the hearthside chair and carefully lowering the baby onto her lap. It is a beautiful afternoon. Put on your cap and step outside. Breathe some fresh air. It will refresh you, daughter. I do not feel like breathing fresh air, Susanna snapped. I might see Edward, she thought, her heart skipping a beat at the idea. And what would I do if I saw him again? What would I say? She could feel her face redden in shame. I was such a fool. Struggling to hold back the tears, Susanna picked up another potato. The door burst open without warning. Susanna and her mother both cried out in surprise as two village men stepped into the room, grim expressions on their faces. What? Martha Good started, but her voice caught in her throat. The baby opened his eyes and gazed up at her, startled. The two men stepped to the center of the room, revealing Benjamin Fire in the open doorway. My husband is not home, Martha Good told the two officers. I believe he is at the Commons. The two men stood stiffly, their expressions set, as Benjamin Fire strode into the room. His black boots clunked heavily on the floorboards, his face red beneath his tall black hat. We are not here for your husband, Martha Good, he said coldly in his booming baritone. I do not understand, she replied, alarm creeping into her voice. The baby uttered a squawk, preparing to cry. Martha Good pulled him close to her chest. What business have you with me, Magistrate Fire? She asked, climbing reluctantly to her feet. Benjamin Fire ignored her question. Keep watch on them, he instructed the two men. I will search for the proof. Proof? Proof of what? Susanna cried, tossing down her knife and jumping to her feet. Why are you here? Why can you not wait for my father to return? Benjamin ignored Susanna, too. He strode quickly to the hearth, his black cloak sweeping behind him. Aha! He bent down, as if picking up something from behind a kettle. When he turned around to face them, Benjamin held a purple cloth bag in one hand. His lips spread into an unpleasant smile. I believe we have the proof we need. Proof of what? Susanna demanded shrilly. Benjamin walked quickly to the table and overturned the bag, spilling its contents onto the tabletop. To her astonishment, Susanna saw a chicken's foot, some feathers, dried roots of some kind, a small bone, and a glass vial containing a blood-colored liquid. "What is that?" Susanna cried. "That does not belong to us!" her mother cried, her face pale, her troubled eyes darting from the items on the table to Benjamin Fire. "We have the proof we need," Benjamin told his men, holding up the empty bag. He gestured to Susanna and her mother. "Take them to the prison. Tie them securely and await for their trial." "Trial?" Martha Good shrieked, holding her baby tightly against her chest. "Trial for what crime?" "For the crime of witchcraft," Benjamin Fire declared, eyeing Susanna coldly. The two officers moved quickly, grabbing Susanna and her mother firmly by the shoulders. Benjamin strode quickly to the door, still gripping the empty purple bag. "Benjamin Fire, you know us!" Martha Good cried desperately. "You know we are a God-fearing, humble, and pious family." "You cannot do this!" Susanna shrieked, fear choking her throat. "You cannot do this to us!" The officers dragged Susanna and her mother to the door. The baby whimpered in confused fear, one tiny pink hand breaking free of his mother's grasp and thrashing the air wildly. As Susanna and her mother were pulled out the door, Benjamin Fire stepped back to watch. His eyes gazed hard at Martha Good, then lingered for a long while on Susanna. He didn't smile. His face was set in rigid coldness, but Susanna thought she caught a gleam of merriment in his dark eyes. Just then her neighbor, Mary Hasley, attracted by the commotion, appeared at their door. "Please take the child," Martha pleaded, and handed the baby to Mary. "Keep him safe." The baby's whimpers turned to frightened cries. As the two men dragged Susanna and her mother away, Benjamin Fire followed close behind, his eyes on Susanna all the while. "This is not happening," Susanna thought, her heart pounding, the blood pulsing at her temples. "This cannot be happening to us." She heard surprised murmurs as they passed through the commons, whispered questions, muffled cries of surprise. The prison loomed ahead, a low clapboard building behind the meeting house. "Why are you doing this to us?" Susanna cried, the words bursting from her throat. "Why are you dragging us from our home?" Benjamin Fire stopped on the path. His voice was low and steady. His eyes locked onto Susanna's. "You two witches will burn before the week is out," he said. Chapter 6. Torches were hung on the meeting house walls. Their flames flickered and threatened to go out every time the door was pulled open, allowing a gust of wind into the hot room. In the prisoner's box at the front of the court, Susanna gripped her mother's hand and stared at the flames. Her mother's hand felt so small, like that of a cold, frightened animal. Without realizing it, Susanna had nervously started chewing on her lower lip. Now she felt the bitter taste of blood in her mouth. "They burn, witches," she thought, staring at the torchlight. "They've burned 3 already." Her entire body convulsed in a shudder of fear. She squeezed her mother's hand tighter. Even though witches in other parts of Massachusetts colony were hanged, Benjamin Fire believed that burning was the only way to punish a witch. "But I am not a witch! Surely if there is justice in Wickham, I will not be found guilty!" The long, low-ceilinged room was filled with shadows. Solemn faces flickered in the orange torchlight. Eyes, dozens of eyes, peered at Susanna and her mother. The rows of wooden benches stretched to the back of the long room. People crowded quietly into them. The frightened citizens of the town, whispering their fears, staring at Susanna and her mother with curiosity and surprise and pity. The whispers and hushed voices grew louder, until Susanna wanted to cover her ears. "Mother, why do they stare at us like that?" she uttered in a frightened voice, leaning so close she could hear her mother's trembling. "They know us. They know who we are." "Some believe they are staring into the faces of evil," Martha Good replied, squeezing her daughter's hand. "But they know us!" Susanna repeated shrilly, her heart thudding in her chest. "Our innocence will soon free us," her mother replied softly. Her words were brave, but her entire body shook with fear. "Edward, where are you?" Susanna wondered. "Have you spoken to your father? Have you told him about us?" "Edward will not let us burn," Susanna said out loud without realizing it. Her mother stared at her with surprise. "What did you say?" Susanna started to reply, but someone in the front bench cried out loudly, Susanna heard a flopping sound and felt a cold ripple of wind close to her ear. Startled voices called out. Susanna heard the flopping again. Like the beating of wings, a shadowy form darted overhead. "A bat!" a man shouted from the back of the room. The creature swooped low toward the flickering light of the torch, then flew over the prisoner's box again, its wings beating like a frightened heart. Matthew Farrer appeared at the front of the room. "Open the doors! Let it out!" he ordered. The bat swung low over the spectators, and Susanna saw several heads duck. She felt a cool ripple of air as the bat flew past her face. Hold open the doors! It will fly out!" Matthew Farrer said in his high-pitched voice. The doors were obediently pulled open. The torches flickered and bent in the invading breeze. A moment later the bat swooped out, disappearing into the starless sky. The doors were closed. Matthew Farrer shouted over the buzz of voices, calling for silence. He served as trial warden, keeping order during his brother's trial proceedings. He did not have Benjamin's booming deep voice. He was not as large or as imposing as his brother, but he had the same fire of ambition in his dark eyes. The room grew silent. The shuffling of feet made the floorboards creak. Someone near the doors coughed loudly. Matthew turned to the prisoners, adjusting the white stock he wore over his robe. "You may summon as many evil creatures as you wish," he told Susanna and her mother, his eyes glowing like dark coals. "You may summon bats or snakes, or the evil one himself, but it will only serve to prove your guilt." "We did not summon that bat!" Susanna cried. "Silence!" Matthew ordered. "Silence! A dark creature like that would not enter our court unless summoned." Loud murmurs burst forth from the rows of benches. Accusing eyes reflecting the torchlight glared at Susanna and her mother. "Silence! Silence!" Matthew shouted, gesturing with both hands. As the room grew quiet, Susanna saw a man at the end of a row rise to his feet. "Release my wife and daughter!" he demanded. "It is father!" Susanna cried to her mother, leaning forward to see him better. "Release them, Matthew Farrer! You know they are not witches!" Mr. Good cried passionately. A tall man in dark robes strode to the front of the room and stood beside Matthew Farrer. "Be seated, William Good," Benjamin Farrer ordered. "We do not place innocent women on trial here." "But they are innocent," William declared. "I swear it by all that is holy." "Be seated," Benjamin commanded in his booming voice. "Be seated, William, or I will remove you from the court." Susanna saw her father open his mouth to protest, but he uttered only a helpless groan before slumping onto his seat. Benjamin Farrer turned to face the accused. His straight black hair and dark eyes glowed almost red in the torchlight. "Martha Good, do you wish to confess your guilt?" he asked, leaning close to the prisoner's box. Susanna's mother cleared her throat. Her voice came out in a choked whisper. "I have no guilt to confess." Sneering, Benjamin turned his harsh gaze on Susanna. "Susanna Good, do you wish to confess your guilt?" Susanna clasped her trembling hands tightly in her lap and lowered her head, a couple of blonde ringlets falling loose from her cap over her face. "I am not a witch," she managed to mutter. "Edward, where are you? Edward, aren't you going to save us? Isn't anyone going to save us?" "Confess now," Benjamin demanded. "There are witnesses in this hall tonight. Witnesses who saw you both dancing with the evil one in the moonlit woods." "That is not true!" Susanna shrieked, on her feet now. "Susanna!" She could hear her mother's warning, feel her mother's touch on her sleeve. "That is not true!" Susanna repeated. "We have never—" "Be silent, witch!" Matthew Farrer commanded, stepping up beside his brother, a fierce scowl on his slender face. "You have already tried to bedevil us by summoning that creature of the night into our meeting hall. Do not disrupt the trial again. Confess now," Benjamin urged. "Your hollow protest only served to demonstrate your guilt." "But we are innocent!" Susanna shrieked. "Release them! Release them now!" Susanna heard her father cry. Low murmurs spread through the long rows of benches, growing to a roar. "Release my innocent wife and child!" William Good cried desperately. "My son needs his mother!" Matthew turned to point to Susanna's father, who stood with his hat gripped tightly in one hand. "Remove him from the hall!" he shouted angrily. Suddenly, John Hasley, Mary Hasley's husband, stood in the back of the meeting-house. "Let him speak, Matthew! You've knowed the Good family for years!" he cried. "Release my family!" William insisted. "This trial is a mistake, a mockery!" "Remove him!" Matthew ordered, silencing John Hasley. From out of the shadows, two militia officers moved quickly, pushing their way into William's row, grabbing him by the shoulders. Staring over the startled, silent faces of the onlookers, Susanna saw her father struggle. She heard angry shouts, scuffling, a hard blow followed by her father's cry of pain. A few moments later she could see her father's limp body being dragged up the aisle. The doors at the back were flung open. The sudden breeze threatened to extinguish the torches against the walls. The flames dipped low. The darkness deepened. The blaze rose up again. The room returned to heavy silence. Her father had been taken out. "You cannot save us, Father," Susanna thought. Cold dread tightened in her throat. "You cannot save us. So who will? Will it be you, Edward? Are you here? Will you speak to your father? Will you rescue us from the fire? Or will you betray me again?" "We have all witnessed their dark powers," Benjamin Fire announced to the rows of onlookers. "We have seen them try to darken this hall just now. The torches nearly went out, but our goodness prevailed over their evil power." He turned to Susanna and her mother. "Your evil could not douse our torches. Your evil could not put out the light of truth in this room." "It was the wind that nearly doused the torches!" Susanna cried. "Silence, witch!" Benjamin screamed, his booming voice ringing in the dark wood walls. He raised one hand high above his head. Susanna saw that his hand was gripping the purple bag, bulging with its odd assortment of items. "I found the proof of your blasphemy," Benjamin declared. I myself found the tools of your witchcraft. I found this near your hearth, a hearth made cold by the presence of the evil one. "It does not belong to us!" Susanna screamed, feeling her mother's restraining hand on her sleeve once again. "Silence!" Benjamin warned, his dark eyes narrowing at Susanna. "We have the proof of your evil practices," Benjamin continued. "We have witnesses who have seen your moonlight dance with the evil one and his servants. And we have seen your attempts to frighten us tonight by bringing a bat into our meeting hall and trying to douse our light." "No!" Susanna shrieked, tugging at the sides of her hair with both hands. "No! No!" "Good shall always triumph," Benjamin continued, ignoring Susanna's shrill cries of protest. "Good shall always triumph over the evil one. Those of us with pure hearts shall always triumph over your kind, Martha and Susanna Good." Susanna's mother lowered her head, but Susanna could see her shoulders trembling and knew her mother was crying. Susanna wanted to scream out her protest, to declare her innocence until Benjamin Fire would listen to her, but she could see that her shouts were of no use. Her heart pounding, her head spinning, Susanna slumped over and leaned her head against her mother's trembling shoulder. "A dark evil has descended on Wickham," Benjamin Fire was saying. "As magistrate, it is my duty to battle it wherever it may appear." He faced the onlookers and lowered his voice as he spoke to them. "It is not my desire to put on trial the wives and daughters of our village, but it is my sacred duty to protect all who are innocent from those possessed by the evil one, such as these." He pointed to Susanna and her mother. "There is nothing left but for you to confess," he demanded, stepping out before the prisoner's box. "Do you confess, Mistress Good? Do you confess your evil practices?" Susanna's mother was crying too hard to reply, her shoulders heaving, her face turned away into the shadows. "Do you confess to practicing the dark arts, Susanna Good?" Benjamin demanded. I am innocent," Susanna uttered in a choked whisper. "Your refusal to confess," Benjamin shouted. "Your unwillingness to confess the truth proves your guilt." He stood over Susanna and her mother, leaning close, so close Susanna could smell his sour breath. "We have found you, Martha Good, and you, Susanna Good, guilty of witchcraft. It is my duty as magistrate to sentence you both." "No, please!" Susanna shrieked, reaching out to him. He backed away, eyeing her coldly, his face half hidden in shadow. "You both shall burn tomorrow night," Benjamin announced, without any emotion at all. A pale half-moon, poking through the wisps of dark cloud, cast a faint rectangle of light through the tiny window of the prison cell. Susanna leaned against the cold wall and stared down at the patch of light on the dirt floor. Her hands were tied behind her, so she could do no witchery, the warden at the jail had told her. Martha Good lay in darkness against the opposite wall, breathing hard, uttering low moans, calling out for her baby. She slept fitfully. Too frightened and upset to sleep, Susanna suddenly saw a shadow making its way up the front of her skirt, a spider. She bent toward it, struggling to free her hands, but they were fastened tightly. She could not brush the spider away. She could only stare at it helplessly as it made its way up her dress. Outside, the white moonlight fell on 2 large mounds of straw, golden under the pale wash of the light. "Is this the straw we will burn in?" Susanna thought with a shudder. "Are these mounds of straw waiting to be our final bed?" The spider was up to her waist, its legs moving quickly over the coarse fabric of the dress. As she stared at the mounds of straw and pictured them afire, a strangled sob burst from her throat. She turned her eyes from the window. "I am not a witch," she thought with fierce bitterness. "My mother is not a witch. What of the 3 who have already burned? Were they innocent too? Are the innocent burning in Wickham? Can that be true?" Suddenly the moonlight appeared to be snuffed out. The tiny cell was cast in deep darkness. Startled, Susanna turned to see a silhouette on the other side of the window, blocking the light. "Who's there?" she stammered. "Susanna," came a hoarse whisper. "Edward!" she cried, feeling a burst of joy lighten her chest. "Edward, have you come to save us?"